7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I hope all of you all are doing good and safe at your respective houses and every other space you are. I'd like to welcome you for Homegrown Academy. Homegrown Academy is powered by Intel and Z by HP. For this four-part series, we're on the third one today, which will basically look at bringing alive some of India's leading creators, innovators, designers, and architects together for you to hone your skills from, to be inspired by their work, and to see how you can take up some learnings from here and craft your own ideas to bring about change. We're going to have a really great session today, and I'm really excited personally because I have a personal passion for what cities can do to build better communities. So going to have the introduction done very quickly. So our third session of the series and the first one of today looks at how can we use architecture to build more creative and sustainable cities. Cities play a very important role for us to build more inclusive communities. Cities play a very important role on representing what we do for our citizens, where it's not only the job of policymakers, architects and designers, but us as active citizens on how we can bring about change. So I'm really excited to announce that we have Ayaz Basrai, the co-founder of the Basrai Design Studios, based out of Mumbai and Goa, who've been instrumental in bringing us some of our favorite restaurants, bars, public spaces, community projects, which look at ranging from your socials and the Bombay Canteen, all the way to building Mumbai's first public skate park, to even finding solutions at the time of COVID on making better mobility done for our citizens. But that's just a glimpse into the amount of work that they have done to bring alive our cities. So without further ado, I'm really excited to present Ayaz to take over the stage, and we'll be doing a small Q&A after. So if you guys have any interesting questions that you would like to ask or gain insights from him about, please take an option on your right side. It's called Q&A. Click on that button, it'll slide out. Leave your questions over there. And after his 30-minute session and a 10-minute session with an HP representative, we will be addressing those questions. And if you don't have any, we definitely have a few and we'll take those. Ayaz, please take this ahead. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Varun. Thank you so much. It's very, very exciting to be on this amazing platform. We are also super kicked to share some of what we've been up to in the studio, and just a little bit about ourselves. So I'm Ayaz. I run two studios with my brother Zamir, who is an architect. I studied industrial design. And the way we frame our practice is really this kind of interesting mix of research and practice. So we run a research lab in Goa called the Basrai Lab, and also a design practice in Bombay called the Basrai Design Studio. And our work sort of spans across various different scales and different manifestations of the built environment. And the topic today is very close to heart. I mean, I think city love and city pride have been, kind of fairly central to our practice right from the time we began. And very, very happy to share that journey with you guys really quick. So what I'll do is I'll maybe try to zip through my presentation, so that gives us some more time for a fun Q&A at the end of this. So yeah, here goes. Am I audible, visible? All good.
Yes, it's perfect. Please go ahead.
Cool. Thanks. So the topic, I mean, of today is really very, very close to heart and very, very interesting. I think the idea of kind of moving architecture towards creating a more sustainable and creative city is actually really, one of our new age concerns. We've always focused the act of architecture around different metrics. I mean, we've been in different phases as a nation, right? So architecture has always expressed national aspiration. It's always expressed the kind of rulership and the kind of democracy that we've been in. It's manifested street culture. It's manifested so many kind of interesting aspects of society and culture. And I feel it's now up to us, the sort of current and next generation of practitioners to really understand what it is that, what are the kind of values that we stand for, and how do we manifest culture in our own unique way. And I believe that a central understanding stems from the metaphors that we draw to cities, right? So when you think about a city, what is it that we are actually thinking about? And so I'll just maybe take two really brief examples to illustrate this point. I think, so one of our abiding metaphors for the city comes from this description of, that there's a word in English called the juggernaut. We kind of recently discovered that this comes from the Jagannath temple. And it actually comes from a very, very old retelling of this story, where there was this kind of a colonial visitor who was in India, and he observed that people were getting crushed under the wheels of the chariot as the chariot was being taken out of the Jagannath temple. And he mistakenly assumed that people jump in front of the chariot as an act of devotion, but it was probably just being pushed by a crowd. And you kind of see parallels of this in every single Mumbai local train, and this idea of being crushed under the wheels of a motive force that we don't really understand. That's really the kind of root of the word juggernaut. And sadly enough, the idea of being in front of a juggernaut is really something that is central to our city experiences today. The city has a motive force of its own, and we are kind of either mute observers, or we are someone who has to submit to that flow and submit to that torrent, and at times sadly be crushed under the wheels as well. And there's another really interesting insight specifically to Bombay, which I'm sure like a lot of you will resonate with. There's a very typical abuse, right? It's called thakela in Bombay. And thakela is interesting because it also applies to people. It applies to, the script of a film. It could apply to a song. It could apply to, say, a Bollywood actor who's fallen out of favor. Like, many things are thakela. But if you actually deconstruct what the emotion behind thakela is, really this idea of being tired, right? It's very human. It's a very human emotion. Like, I mean, why would you assign so much stigma to something which is so human? And it is because Bombay has a speed setting. Like Bombay has, it is kind of reserved for people who are kind of emotionally and physically robust, who can actually make sense of all this, who can actually, be on the treadmill and run faster than the treadmill is moving, so that you can stay in the same place. And the idea of being thakela is really someone who's, taken a pause, or he's just, he or she has just kind of slowed down on that treadmill and is in the process of being thrown off. So these two experiences, I feel this idea of this vast city, which is, moving forward at a great speed, and you need to either, catch up or get off the treadmill. I think these are these kind of two metaphors that I believe actually create a lot of distance between the citizens and the city. And to bridge this distance, I feel it's very important to look at new metaphors, right? And new definitions, and which are the kind of definitions that are actually empowering people. Like what would empower you in your visualization of a city that will push you to do things and to engage with the city and to kind of, be in a meaningful relationship with the city. And I find like a lot of hope in this definition of Banksy's, where he calls a city a party where everyone's invited, right? And if one starts rethinking our relationship with the city in a very, very meaningful way, I believe therein lies the route to kind of, creative and sustainable action with cities. So with this context, I believe getting involved in some kind of a relationship, in some kind of a marriage, in some kind of a steady relationship with the city, if one may call it that, is kind of really important, and it's very central to our practice and what we've tried to do from the beginning. So I think I could draw some parallels with our kind of relationship with the city in the way that you start any relationship. If whether it is with your significant other, whether it is with your spouse, whether it is with your grandparents. I mean, the key to a successful relationship is really to understand yourself, right? What is it that you are bringing to the table? What is it that your personality is? What is it that your preferences and references are? And for us, it became understanding Bandra to a large extent, because Bandra has been home. I mean, we were born and brought up here. We've gone to school here. All our friends are here. So as a practice, being in Bandra, living in Bandra, playing in Bandra, living and loving in Bandra, it became very important to understand our context. And if we had to understand the changes that are going on in Bandra, we have to understand what makes that suburb tick. Right. And I feel this is a first step for anyone from any background. I mean, if you're a musician, if you're a chef, if you're any kind of a practicing professional, you're an accounts person, I mean, the point is to kind of really extend yourself and understand the context you live in from your own lens, right? So us being architects and designers, we obviously embarked on this project of understanding what makes a suburb tick. Started documenting these lovely monuments of exquisite beauty, started, a very detailed mapping process. So the image on your top left is actually maps made from stories, because maps don't exist for the year 1610. The first set of consolidated maps that were created were actually around the 1960s, which is post-independence. And then I think in 2010 is when we created maps of Ranbir. So very little documentation exists of these urban villages, and we were fascinated to see what makes these tick. So it went on in a fairly elaborate kind of a mapping process. Being architects, we kind of tried to understand our context in the sense that how old are the buildings around us, what are private spaces, what are public spaces, what are significant monuments, and all these are kind of just in the sense of understanding our own context. What is it that is the creator of this spirit of Bandra that we all sort of kind of so interested in. And of course, along the way, many random experiments, like we also tried out citizen signage, because if anyone has been in one of the, any one of the villages in Bandra, you'll realize how much of a labyrinth or a maze they are. House numbers don't match up. It's not like house numbers are signed sequentially. So we thought, what if we could create a pedestrian system or a signage system that is graffiti based? So you can actually just have different letters that are pasted together to create citizen signage. And what if we could create a contraption that could strap onto lampposts, right? So the one on the top right is a sort of a homemade contraption that could just reflect the house number onto your house. So the image on the bottom right is our own studio where we used to reflect the number 10. So if you're you're using the free light from the lamppost and just creating a house number signage based on a simple kind of a contraption. So this made it just easier to order pizza at night, for example. And of course, it went on to fairly elaborate documentation. So there's, this lovely, beautiful bungalows in Bandra. And the idea of using these kind of tools is to really create build record. That if later on you want to reconstruct, or you want to rebuild, or you want to repair, or say if there's a natural calamity and something, there's some sort of untoward incident. I mean, architectural record is one way to actually create or recreate objects of beautiful beauty. And I believe like the next stage in any kind of healthy relationship is really to express your love. Like you need to be as kind of open and vocal with, expressing this heartfelt love. And for us, because we are also a primarily commercial design office, I mean, we do a lot of restaurants, bars, clubs. I think you can attribute most of the junk that you see around you in the city to, in some way to our studio and studios like us. So this is the Smokehouse Delhi, but and maybe some of you have visited these venues. It's a pan-India project. And what we really felt at the heart of a Smokehouse Delhi is to really express this deep love that we have for Bombay, right? So just a quick example, this is the one in Parel and at the Phoenix Mills. And the image on your bottom left is really this lovely anecdote that that we kind of chanced upon in this deep research that we were doing for only the Parel neighborhood, right? So it's an image of a sea of umbrellas, and there was, I mean, the history of Phoenix Mills before it became this kind of shiny, glossy, kind of, behemoth is really interesting because it used to be called the Bitya Mills. And so Subhash Chandra Bose was there to support the mill struggle, which is workers against the establishment. And it started raining in typical Bombay style, and all the workers in the whole, kind of assembly, they put up their umbrellas, and there was, one of the agitators was a person by the name of Dange. He actually took the mic and said, "Subhash Babu wants to see all of you. You've come to a agitation. Please close your umbrellas." And one by one, everyone closed their umbrellas and they stood in this pouring rain to listen to what Subhash Chandra Bose had to say. And this has happened in exactly the same location as, where those spin cycling kind of workshops happen outside. So I think we're surrounded by magic and we're surrounded by beauty. It's just a matter of looking for it. It's a matter of kind of researching deeply and finding these lovely connections with our own city, which talk to us individually. This is the one in Bandra, of course. So the Smokehouse Delhi in Bandra again references all the Bandra love that we have. There are tiny illustrations coded all over the place, and if you look closely at the Smokehouse Delis, you'll find a small QR code at the bottom of them. And if you tag those, it takes you to a special website that we had set up, which actually brings alive the whole history of the suburb. So the idea is that we're already surrounded with a lot of beauty and a lot of stories and a lot of nostalgia and a lot of love. And the idea is to kind of, just look around us and spot these synergies and kind of, harbor it in any way possible. I mean, us being a restaurant / commercial kind of design outfit, this is the way we find our own relationship with the city. But of course, the canvas is wide open. I mean, the process is really kind of, discipline agnostic in that way. Of course, Smokehouse Delhi gets fairly elaborate and it's a process we really enjoy. So we've kind of hand-drawn lots of these across India. I mean, every time we think about Smokehouse Delhi, our shoulders automatically start hurting because of the muscle memory. And again, City Love takes various different avatars in that sense. I mean, this is the Bombay Canteen. So this was all about a nostalgic nod to old Bombay. And the idea was to kind of synergize fairly closely with the menu and the kind of experiments on the plate. So the idea was to kind of create this part canteen, part Irani cafe, part kind of old Bombay insert, which is a bit abstract. So it allows for multiple interpretations. And it's loosely based on the floor plan of an old bungalow from Perry Road. So there's a lot of, again, hidden subtext in the fit out. And, using mallard stone and stained glass, which are these two kind of very quintessentially old Bombay materials. So that kind of informed the fit out as well. And of course, this ode to Bombay has spread across multiple projects for us. So Masala Bar on Carter Road was really the an ode to the sunset that we've grown up with, right? So being in Bombay, being in Bandra, we used to walk down to Carter Road almost every night. And you would see the magic of the night and magic of the kind of culture that came out at night and this lovely moment when the sun touches the sea. So at that moment, what we've done at Masala Bar is to actually put small magnifying glasses into the facade. So at that same moment, when you're sitting at the bar counter, as the sun touches the sea, the magnifying glasses pop the sunset. So it's a lovely kind of ode to a sunset. At least we felt so. And then you have projects like Cafe Zoe, which was really an ode to the working class culture in Bombay, where people would actually come spend the whole day here, enjoy this lovely natural light that filters into the mills, which we've almost lost connection with as a city. And even the Pizza Expresses, they kind of, express the proximity to Colaba and the harbor with Rudyard Kipling on the walls. And then you have others which express the history of the railways. So I think across various different projects, what one is trying to do is to kind of, tap into different moments of city love and express this love as promiscuously as possible. Again, in any kind of relationship, you end up celebrating freely. I think the idea of celebration is really powerful because it brings people together. It cuts across religious or demographic divides. And, celebrating festivals in Bombay has been very, very central to what we've done as a practice as well. So it's our relationship with festivals started off with the Celebrate Bandra Festival, where we kind of, help curate and also write the souvenir for that year. Which is, again, a deep dive into stories, into kind of, a more contemporary young retelling of what it's like to live in Bandra, for example. So these are some of the things that we had worked on. We also, every year, help organize the Ranvar Festival with are kind of fellow Ranvarites in the village, and this happens. To watch out for it. Hopefully, this will happen next year once things settle down a little bit in Ranvar. And we build Christmas trees. We kind of work with the village to kind of decorate the whole village. This is some images from the Ranvar festival which happened. I think we were the only stall which made a loss in this festival because we were architecture geeks, and we kind of put up architecture models and diaries, and which we thought everyone would be really excited about. But I think it was a good wake-up call, because most people in Bandra are really excited about the beef cutlets and the fish cutlets, not so much about diaries and stationery. So again, this was a kind of an open project. We kind of put up a small exhibition about the history of Bandra. So the idea is to kind of just get into any kind of touch point that helps us express this love in the most free and celebratory way possible. These are some of the Bandra doll houses that we created. So we kind of look at documenting monuments of exquisite beauty. So this is the St. Andrew's Church. And these are small kits that you can buy to put together and kind of paint them, and you can create small shrines. You can do some fun stuff with these kits as well. Again, it's a way of taking architectural documentation and passing it on to people who could be interested in purchasing a kit like this. All the proceeds from the sales of these kits go to the Ranvar ALM. So this helps them, say, pay electricity bills for the oratory, which is what's happened one year. So stuff like that it kind of creates these interesting serendipitous kind of connections. In some relationships, you tend to sleep around. It's kind of spices your relationship a little bit if you're able to express it out properly. For us, as a studio, we've been very, very open to collaboration, open to kind of aligning with people who share a similar passion or similar vision. I feel this is very, very important again, because it tends to round out your voice. And I think being part of multiple collectives and collaboratives, it helps, us as a studio understand what our skills are, understand what we bring to the table. It helps understand, it helps squash ego, which is, I think, the first step towards creating anything, worthwhile for the city. If one approaches it with a certain sense of personality or ego or studio kind of me first kind of an attitude, the city kind of suffers. So I think we've been part of these two amazing collectives. One is the Bandra Collective, which is a group of 6 architects who do pro bono work for Bandra. So we work very closely with the BNC, with municipal cooperators like Asif Zakaria, Ashish Shelar, to kind of do sort of Bandra forward experiments. So the one on the left is the Mount Mary Church signage, which was one of the first projects that we took up as the Bandra Collective. And we were trying to develop a system of signage for churches in Bandra. So as churches or parishes commission these signage, these will start popping up across different neighborhoods in Bandra. And we're also part of a fledgling collective in Goa called the Goa Collective, which is with, again, 2 like-minded other studios in Goa. We're trying to do work with conservation, we're trying to work with old Goa and some of the monuments there as well. So between these between framing our relationship in a bit more promiscuous way, we'd actually try to extend the work that we do. So this is one of the projects that our studio took up within the larger Carter Road Promenade project. So we try to create a small park where, citizens, elder citizens, young citizens could come here, work out, have a small public gym, these kind of smaller inserts that could let people play with it in different ways. So it's a way that we can actually express some of our studio personality on a common project. This is the skate park, which kind of recently got this lovely paint makeover by the Bombay skateboarding community. So again, as Bandra Collective, this was designed by Architecture Brio as part of their kind of portion of the promenade. And it's really kind of now become a different community hub, and it's become a place where we've attracted a very different demographic, which has now adopted this place and made it home. And just some before and after images of the promenade, which kind of feature some work that has happened from the Bandra Collective. We also worked on a COVID response for some of the most congested market streets. So this is in Grand Road, and we're also doing a similar pilot at Pali Market. So the idea is to kind of look at social distancing guidelines, internationally apply them in a uniquely Bombay, very quick, down and dirty kind of a way, which can be done almost overnight by unskilled labor. And so So, I mean, the idea is to kind of support existing government practices with small planning processes. And again, central to a healthy relationship with the city is to really dream of futures together. So, like in any relationship, creating a future that is extremely nuanced and something that we are very, very excited to kind of, engage with together. It becomes a very, very central kind of a practice. So I'll take you through some of these, interesting provocations that one is looking at. So if you look at the Kala Ghoda statue, which was evicted in 1965, um, the whole district gets its name from the statue, but the statue actually doesn't exist. And what we decided was that, with this current spate of building statues across various different locations across the country, I mean, one could actually express a very healthy relationship with our current reality rather than statues just becoming symbols of politics or symbols of weak kind of ideology. So, for example, we started creating a series of statues that would actually be more meaningful to the country that we hope to inhabit. So these statues are commissioned for something called the India Futures Project, which we've been running for the last 2.5 years, which is really exploring an Indian futures voice. And I think this is something that we'd also love to chat about later, is this idea of populating the kind of the internet, or populating our contemporary imagination with Indian futures, which is, central to decolonizing our own minds, because what we're actually faced with in most situations are futures that are designed for us by, say, Silicon Valley, or by, tech companies, or, people who are actually stakeholders in more tech forward futures. But I believe that futures are actually not shaped only by technology, they're also shaped by culture. So it's very, very important that culture and technology work hand in hand to kind of really visualize rich futures. So this is based on a simple statistic that India actually produces. I think it's the number 5 in e-waste production worldwide. And we have very, very limited things that we do with that e-waste. In fact, a lot of rare metals don't even exist in Earth, they only exist in e-waste. So it's very important. Most cities are going to get into e-waste mining in a big way to kind of recycle and remove these kind of precious metals from our old phones and old laptops. Again, it's very interesting that we're doing this with HP, because it'll be lovely for us to, maybe visualize a future like this, where old appliances are actually repurposed and retaken into public imagination using statues. So this tries to visualize a Gandhi statue, which is offshore, which is pretty much the space that the proposed Shivaji statue would occupy. And it's recasting the idea of a statue as an e-waste mine. So you have a massive e-waste mine below the statue, and as gold is rescued from PCBs, that gold gets flecked onto the statue. So the statue becomes almost a data visualization of how much gold is being rescued and how many PCBs are being recycled. This is another imagination of a statue as an aquatic nature park and a coral reef scaffolding, because with projects like the Coastal Road, you're going to face a massive extinction of coral reefs along the coastline. So one could actually commission visionary projects which actually involve building artificial coral reefs and encouraging coral growth rather than having ecologically destructive projects. This is a fun one. This is the Kasturba Gandhi Memorial City Server. So we were trying to visualize a future in which usually the kind of day-to-day operating of a city could actually be done much more efficiently by a artificial intelligence system supported by a few decision makers. So a lot of the work of say managing an electricity grid, or managing the traffic light system, or managing all these things will eventually be done by large servers. So we thought, what if there's a huge underwater server that is on which the city owns, and all our data, instead of being stored in Silicon Valley, is actually stored in cities. And what you're seeing as the two Pac-Man screens are actually these two algorithms that are competing for the rights to run the city's data. So they're playing a very high frequency game of Pac-Man, and whichever algorithm wins the game is then given the task of running the city till the next algorithm is developed. So these are the kind of statues that we hope to see, which are performative statues, which are not just ornamental, because statues actually take up a huge amount of public expenditure. I mean, it's just a Google search away to see how much these statues actually cost the taxpayer. So we were actually, and we don't have a problem with building statues. I think the idea of building statues is almost 35,000 years old. But I think they don't need to be only statues. They could be something that actually has a healthy relationship with the city, that actually is getting us to rethink what a statue can be. And of course, it gets into very interesting territory when you start looking at the culture of skyscrapers. We have Bombay's flush with very high, sort of vertical buildings that are servicing, say, at times only one or two families. We find that a waste of space is almost equivalent to a waste of water or waste of oil. Space is a resource like any other, and it needs to be treated as such. So we're looking at a more progressive future, that when larger buildings are able to house more people, to kind of create multiple different city responses. So, for example, the base of buildings could actually be air draft catchers and a more scrubbing and purification kind of a process. You can have rainwater harvesting built into buildings. You can have housing societies that are built in. It allows many different functions to be grafted onto buildings. If one had to imagine large-scale AI being deployed in Bombay through drones, like you can actually have drones deployed to count over tree populations, for example, in RA, and it could alert you to how many trees are being removed real time. So it could be a lovely tool for activism. It could be a lovely tool for even municipalities to judge the health of the city, and especially in a situation where, like a pandemic, where health and ventilation is so important. Where we're systematically destroying lungs of cities across India. It's very, very critical to keep a track of, what is actually the life-saving components of cities. Also, we had drones of Swachh Bharat, so essentially drones that go and clean up, gutka stains across the city with sort of, mounted high-pressure air jets. Again, drones that could clean up messes while people stay at home. This is interesting. This is like, a drone fitted out with an infrared camera. So what happens is when someone's, outside your compound wall, taking a piss, the drone could actually detect that heat signature of the urine on the wall and kind of sound an alarm. So it's really a kind of a virtual watchman that's watching over the building. And a lot of these scenarios are actually, projected as, I mean, you may have guessed some of the subtext that it's, projected mostly as satire. I think as architects, we don't tend to take advantage of the vast amount of literary tools that we have at our disposal, right? Most architecture studios or design offices work primarily with analogy or metaphor, which are just two of the literary tools that are accessible to us. I'm very excited about satire, about, farce, about punning, about, creating bad jokes that actually talk more directly to our society than, than metaphor, for example. So this is some of the work that we do. We also look at a lot of data-driven processes. So, for example, the World Health Organization, it actually mandates 9 square meters of urban green space per resident, right? So this is the World Health Organization's kind of standards. And if you look at other megapolises around the world, I mean, New York actually provides almost 27 square meters per person, and London provides almost 32 square meters per person. And it's anyone's guess as to what Mumbai provides, right? Mumbai provides 1.1 square meters of open green space per resident. And so it's obviously, it's a slow motion dystopia. It's actually already set up for any kind of disease that involves health and ventilation. So, I mean, the pandemic should come as no surprise to us. These cities don't have lungs, they don't have open space for us to experience. And we started thinking that what if we had to actually multiply our open space, count by 9 square meters? And if we had a progressive government, if we had the kind of bylaws that mandate this, what would we have to do as residents, right? So we started wondering about the space in between buildings. Like, what if we had to actually create a very hardworking natural environment that spans the space between two buildings? So you have community spaces, you have small skate parks, you have, urban farms, you have these kind of grafted spaces that exist between two buildings would have their own navigation. We started looking at the Methi River. This is the kind of, and this river was actually a very abundant, rich source of minerals for Bombay when it used to be, the 7 islands. And this is the kind of the fork in the Methi River that is abutting, some of the informal settlements. And we started imagining a future where you had these kind of floating barges along the river, which are urban farms, which people could have pedestrian access to, which people could walk on, walk off, and get their daily produce from there. And how would we actually use that to increase Bombay's green footprint. And again, another visualization of the whole Chowpatty area, which could actually be a system of elevated urban parks. Because what we really have access to in Bombay is a lot of terracescape. So it's almost like the whole city has a footprint on the roof, which is unexplored. And if you have to create an elevated urban park, which has its own navigation, which has its own community, which has its own kind of, motive force, we could actually reimagine large parts of the city. So if you had a whole system of interconnected terrace parks, you could actually have a whole community of adventure seekers, people who are actually navigating this whole roofscape in a very different way, free from the traffic, free from fumes, and creating a very, very lived in, very, very involved, extremely lovable city. So thank you very much. That's a little bit from me.
Thank you so much, Ayaz. And I hope everyone who's tuned in really liked whatever was shared. I think we definitely did. What was incredible to see is that we learned this thing that past empowers the future. And that's something that we learned perfectly well over here, where a lot of insights from the past can actually be implemented if we adapt it to today's time. And getting to see various aspects of how your restaurants brought to life so many unique identities, utilize things about the city that were not ever thought of before. And especially, I think in today's time, given that COVID has given us an opportunity to reinvent, reimagine, and also let our leaders know where to hide. It's given the onus on creators such as you and architects and designers to come together to find these solutions. So that was incredible to learn. Just a few things. If anyone tuning in has any questions, please feel free to leave them in your Q&A on the right side. We will address that really briefly. And coming up next, we'll have Mr. Wilton Pangoria, the head of systems, who will be taking you through some incredible products by Z by HP powered by Intel, which can actually be incredibly useful to bring your concepts to life, where you are the creator and that technology becomes the enabler. So I'll have Wilton take over, and then we'll take over a few questions with Ayaz right after that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Varun. What a great presentation I have just seen. It's amazing, and the product. I mean, the concept is really very amazing. So quickly, from a concept, from a overall solution to a product side, because that is what we do for HP. So let me share my presentation to you, and let's see what are the product line what we have, and the solutions we have for users. So quickly, the Z, if you see on your screen, represent the product which is called as workstations within HP, the solutions around workstations. So we address the solutions regarding virtual reality, architectural fraternity, creators, artists, at the same time, the data scientist, the scientist, who was working on AutoCAD, someone who's into geospatial, all that product line or the solutioning belong to Z. So let's quickly see why people trust so much on brand like Z within HP, because we are the innovators in within the time frame. We have innovated lot many things, and we are the one who brings lot many things in the foray of users. So if you think from a HP perspective, or if you think talk about HP, we are in this business of workstation from last 35 years. And you won't find any other brand who has been so old or who has been having such an experience in workstation of 35 years. If you talk about any brand, they are just not more than 5 to 10 years old, maybe 15 years maximum. So we carry that legacy. So having said that, we have brought in a lot of, and time to time we get a lot of, innovations into the field of workstation. So starting with world's first single source remote workstation solutions, So in the time of COVID, we all are working from remote locations, from working from home, and it becomes much more difficult for the creators or the power users who actually were using the power of your desktop workstations within their office. So this is the solution which is in collaborative in nature. You can share your files, you can collaborate within your colleagues outside the organization, within the organization, so and so forth. Not only this, we have also brought in a VR headset, virtual reality headset, which is among major vendors, which has got a highest resolution, that is 2K per eye. So again, as I said, this is again first and the foremost. When your workflows requires color criticality, your workflow require color criticality, or if you are color critical applications, then we have got something which is called as Z27X, which is a Dreamcolor certified desktop monitor. You can club it to your mobile workstation or your desktop workstation. So this is what we have created along in close coordination with DreamWorks. So if you talk about, so this can reproduce 2 billion colors, and this is also certified for reproducing a 4K resolution. At the same time, you can do a real-time color calibration on the field. Moving to mobile workstation, the world's most powerful mobile workstation of its size, it is 1.5 kg, 1.9 kgs, 15-inch form factor, and scalable up to 16 GB. You won't find any other mobile workstation of this scale. Now coming on mobile workstation, which is most powerful, you can scale up to 16 GB of dedicated graphics for RTX 5000 with 128 GB of RAM and so on and so forth. From mobile workstation, quickly I'm switching to desktop workstation. If you see the most powerful desktop workstation, Z8 Z4. So if you are into data science, if you are into 4K, if you are into 4K rendering, if you are someone who is looking a scalable machine or the most scalable machine, so the Z8 Z4 can give you up to 56 cores. It can give you up to 96 GB of dedicated graphics. It can give you up to 33 terabyte of RAM. From the most scalable or the most powerful to the mini, we call it Z2 mini, the most smallest desktop workstation. If you talk about, desktop workstation, which is ideal for AutoCAD users, wherein they can plug in or they can position this behind their desktop monitors, or this will become a complete certified machine. So this is Z2 mini. Now quickly, let's see what we have in our portfolio on a AV format. So let's see quickly what we have in portfolio for 2022 or 21. Starting from mobile workstation, if you see, if your workflows are for 2D graphics, if you are someone who is into power users and require a machine which is not a notebook or which is not a desktop, but more than that, so you can look for a product which is called a ZBook Firefly, the thin and light mobile workstation. So 14-inch typically weighs 1.48 kg, 1.34 kgs. 15-inch will weight 1.7 kgs. So, but if you are looking, if your workflows are color critical, if your workflows are you require a higher machine. So if you are someone who are into content creation or data science or 3D or VR, then you should move to a product which is called a ZBook Fury 15 and 17-inch. These are workhorses. These are ideally designed for scalable applications. But if you are a student and if you require a entry-level 3D machine, or at the same time you want it to be a mobile, so best cost versus performance you will get from ZBook Power. But if you are someone who require a style statement, someone who is looking for best for 3D and graphics and video, then we have two products which is called as ZBook Studio and ZBook Create. These are in 15-inch form factor and very, very light. So typically a weight is 1.9 kgs in 15-inch form factor. You won't find any machine which is scalable to RTX 5000, which is a 16 GB, or 2080, which is again a 8 GB graphics in a commercial platform with this weight. Quickly moving from a mobile workstation to a desktop workstation. So if you see, this diagram shows about the desktop workstation. So on my left there is Z2 Mini and Z2 SFF. If your workflow requires entry-level 3D application or entry-level 3D usage, then you can go for a Z2 Mini or Z2 SFF. But if you are someone who are into 4K cinema, or someone who is require 4K rendering, someone who's into data science or VR content creation, then you require a scalable machine or scalable workstation. We call it as Z6 and Z8. But if you are a student, or if you are someone who requires an entry-level 3D or mid-level 3D kind of an application, ideally best cost versus performance you will get, or you should look for product like Z1 and Z2. But if you are an artist, at the same time, your work requires a scalable, mid-level scalability, or best for 3D design rendering, or high-density solutions like Z Central 4R or Z4, these are the products you should look for. So this is about desktop portfolio. Let's quickly see the product which is ideally suited for the content creation, ideally suited for the guys who are in a business of virtual reality, or who are in a business of animation. So let's see this product. So this is the other details of the product what we have seen. We call it as ZBook Studio or ZBook Create. So what we will get in that product is ZBook Studio, ZBook Create is bigger canvas. So this is 15.6 inch with True Color or Dream certified as well. Talking about the graphics capability. So this is the world's smallest 15-inch notebook created for gaming and for creation. So world's smallest, again, VR ready 15-inch notebook. We have got a lot of patented technology built into this, which is called as vapor chamber, to force out the heated air out of the machine, so that machine will perform to its optimum. You first time ever you will get a GeForce graphics card on a commercial platform. At the same time, you will also get on Studio, you will get a RTX series graphics card. So this is ideally designed for a mobile guys, the guys who are into field, the guys who are always in touch with the customer face to face. On moving to a product which is called a ZBook Firefly, the guys who are the users who are in power, who are the power users, but at the same time are mobile. So this is 15-inch form factor. The typical weight of this kind of mobile workstation is 1.34 kgs. This is the aspirational product for the guys who require a powerful machine, but at the same time require a lot of mobility. You will get a pro grade or professional grade graphics, which is P520, which is 4 GB. It will give you a 17 hours of battery life and designed for mobility. So when I interact with users, or when I interact with students, or the users of different applications, there is a lot of confusion, or there is a lot of discussion which happens, that when they should be using a notebook, or what kind of user should be using a ZBooks or workstations. So here is a quick comparison based on applications. So if you are someone into visual blogging, or someone into visual presentations, MS Auditor, MS Suite, then your either you can use ZBook, or you can use notebooks as well. But if you are someone into Cinema 4D, or Adobe Substance, After Effects, Premiere Pro, or someone into VR, someone into SolidWorks or AutoCAD, then ZBook is more reliable and more scalable for your application. If you are not using any mobile workstation, desktop workstation, then somewhere you are lagging in your workflows. Quickly, there is a confusion, there is a lot of discussion which happens, what kind of graphics we should be using, GeForce versus Quadro. So if you are into a business of content consumption, if you are a gamer, if you are someone who is using the content already, which has already been created by third party or by your company, then ideally you should use so GeForce. But if you are someone into content creation, if you are someone into, you require a precision application, or you require a precise outcome, then Quadro series is ideally suited for your workflow. If you are someone who is looking for a certified graphics, then Quadro series. If you are someone who is looking for a longer period of availability of graphics, then Quadro is optimal use for you. Then quickly comparing on different applications, whether core count is more important, or core speed is more important, or GPU is more important, or RAM is more important. So depending upon different application, I have created this matrix. So if you are in a business of photography, right, and if you're using a Lightroom, then core count doesn't matter. So you can use typically a 4 core with a clock speed of 2.7 or 3 gigahertz. Your performance will come. But if you are someone into videography, and if you're using Adobe Premiere, then your core count is more important. So more number of core will give you more performance. Core speed is not that important. So this is a quick comparison on based on different use case or different applications and the different attributes of a processor. Now here is a quick comparison on graphics card on different graphics on different applications. So if you see the black bar represent a MacBook Pro Radeon Pro Vega, dark silver represent RTX 2060, light silver represent RTX 2070, and golden represent 2080. On different application, this is the benchmark which has been published by third party. So if you see Adobe Lightroom 1 versus 1.6 on 2080, we beat 2080 beats Radeon Pro Vega 20 Holo. But if you're using Autodesk Arnold, it is 10 times faster than Radeon Pro Vega, right? If you're using LumaX as an application, right, it is 3.8 times faster than Radeon Pro Vega. So this is a quick comparison on benchmarks. Now coming on ecosystem, what we have. So when we talk from a user or creative perspective, creative workflows always require a larger screen to visualize your product or to visualize your designs. So we have a complete solution starting from 22-inch up to 43-inch, which is again 4K. Not only this, then we have got something which is called as specialty monitor. Specialty monitors are for color critical workflows. So we have got 31-inch, which is Z31X, 27X, and 24X. So these all three monitors are Dreamcolor certified. So these are been created in close collaboration with DreamWorks. So they have got a capability to reproduce 2 billion colors. At the same time, they are also 4K resolution certified, and they have got complete ports available. So from a ports perspective, these are easy to connect. You get easy USB-C ports, video and power for a video and power delivery. Right, they are supported for brilliant 4K 3840 by 2160 resolution, right, and these are factory color calibrated for sRGB and BT.709. So this is from a HP perspective or from a HP portfolio, what we have for creators, for architects, for the users, where in the workflow, where they have got a creative workflows. So that's all from my side. Over to you, Varun, again. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a patient listener.
Thank you so much, Wilton, sir. That was really helpful. And I hope that all the people tuning in would consider the HPZ products for bringing your ideas to life, because I'm sure like the ideas that you guys have in your head can definitely be brought to life. And I think HP can definitely be the best highlight how to make that happen. We'll address a few questions. Thank you so much for the ones that have shared them in the chat box. Ayaz, we got 4 really great questions, so I'd like to just share those with you, and then if we can take them up one by one. Okay, so there's question number 1, which is from Smriti Kushwaha. She's asking, what is the most important skill for future thinking?
Sorry. Yeah, that's a great question. So, I believe that we're actually at a cusp, in the sense that the way we've thought about things through generations is actually drastically about to change. And this is really with the arrival of the internet, really. We hold a very sort of a deep-rooted metaphor in the way we think, which is the metaphor of the tree, right? So this is the kind of thinking that, say, spawns statements like form follows function, or make things happen, which actually is a manifestation of the way we think in flowcharts, right? So you have a problem which has a solution, you have causality essentially inbuilt. But with the coming of the internet and with us understanding our own neuroscience a bit better, I think where future's thinking is actually heading towards is thinking in networks, right? So it's the way your brain works, it's the way the universe works. It's actually an intelligent network amongst which things emerge. So it's not about making things happen as much as it is about allowing things to emerge. And this comes in through mapping adjacencies, right? So this is actually fairly central to the way our research lab in Goa operates. We've been building out a futures map of the year 2035, which is mapping different adjacencies with various different fields of of work. So right from climate to gender to technology to design and architecture, through to culture, through dance and music. I mean, the idea is to kind of start spotting adjacencies between different disciplines. And we're living in a world which is going to be powered on collaboration, right? So the more people talk to each other from different backgrounds, I think the richer the output. So if you're actually looking to learn across disciplines, that's actually a key learning to kind of engage with futures thinking. And most of our insight and most of our kind of mapping comes from this extremely detailed map that we've been building for the last 4.5 years or so.
Thank you so much. And Smriti, I hope that helped answer your question. But just to add there, Ayaz, is there a way for us consumers, people tuning in, to read more about everything you've talked about, all of this? Is there an Instagram page? Is there a website or a blog where people can actually learn a little bit more about all this future related work and the mapping you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we keep posting snippets of this work on Instagram. I mean, that's on our handle, The Bus Ride. And we also have a slightly more long format page, which is on Issue. So we kind of self-publish a lot of this work on there as well. So yeah, I mean, it's all free to download. It's all kind of, open source. So, I mean, yeah, check it out. I mean, if there's stuff that you find you resonate with, and we'd love to hear from, people who've been listening in. I mean, the idea is that, all these are co-created futures. So none of it is deterministic in any way.
Thank you so much. So please head to @thebusride on Instagram, and please do reach out to Ayaz. I don't think I can directly give his email ID or to the internet, but I think you can reach out to him and he'll make that happen. Coming to question number 2, which I think a lot of people will be excited to know about. This is by Tejas Joshi. He wants to get trained at your office. Rather, are there avenues for people to work with you, intern, creative residencies? What opportunities does any of your verticals of the Bus Ride Studio and any other projects for people to work with you?
Yeah, we do. Have spots for interns. I mean, we actually try to reserve internships for people who have a passion in research, because we felt that people fresh out of school need to actually take on one thing and see it through, rather than being plugged into the studio and do lots of random things. So, I mean, we do. In fact, projects like the Bandra project's actually been driven on student research. So it takes a certain amount of single-minded effort to see through something for 6 months, and you don't stop thinking through the process. It's not like you stop thinking and start doing at a particular point. The So I think, and we have, obviously, it's a small studio, so we have limited spots, but I don't see that as a hurdle for anything that you need to do anyway. I mean, if one has to, say, create a meaningful relationship with your own city, which has really been the kind of, I guess, the basic argument that one is trying to make. Then I think it just takes a more closer understanding of your own skill sets. I mean, what drives you really as a person? I mean, is it more, say, do you have a passion in photography? Do you have a passion in music? Is there something in food? Is there something in documentation? Is there something, I mean, the touch points are infinite, and it's really sustainable if it comes from a very deep personal place. It's actually not so important to kind of find this outside your own personality. It's more important to kind of look deep and find this within your own kind of framing. And if you create a relationship with the city on those terms, there's a chance that it could actually blossom into something very, very powerful. So I think therein lies the clue to really. I mean, we're happy to be part of that journey in whatever way. But I feel, the current environment, and I think, Varun's a great example of that. I mean, this kind of network thinking where you're able to actually curate, magical experiences for people through his powerful platform. Right. So I think one of the ways in which that one could propagate your own practice is to really look for adjacencies and look for people who are doing the kind of work you're doing, reach out to them, align with them. It's a great environment. I mean, I think there's a lot to thank for the current media environment right now. I mean, I don't think we had access to this when we started practice around, almost 16 years ago. So it's a great time to be in design and great time to be in practice. And definitely reach out to studios and practices that you resonate with, and create a project with them, if not work with them full time.
Thank you so much. And I think they just had covered it. And also, in some ways, you're absolutely right. I think bringing alive change takes a collective effort, no matter what background you're from. And that can come in various ways. And I think your work is a clear example. But I think it's not just about getting a chance to work with you, but there's so many things that can be put together, and you building this network to enable this. So I hope we get to work with you. I hope the people host you didn't get to work with you. And I think there's two more quick questions. I think I'll let, so this is one that I think everyone keep asking, and so might as well. Daniel is asking, what are your thoughts on the coastal road?
Oh, man. No, I think it's a curse of our generation, really, that, we're not, we actually, I think we're maybe another 10 or 15 years away from prioritizing the right things, right? And it's really a waiting game. I think we're going to be led by policy, which is going to be stuffed down our throat from outside India. I don't see progressive environmental policy, prioritizing corals over concrete, really, it's sort of civilizational myopia. I mean, we're not able to see beyond the next 5-year plan. So I think if one has to actually take a long look at what massive transportational infrastructure does to a city, you can already learn from international cities where places like Detroit, places like LA, where larger roads and larger transportation networks have only resulted in more congestion, right? It's a matter of actually decongesting city centers, actually encouraging pedestrianism, actually encouraging active cycling culture. But I believe that we're in this kind of a civilizational myopia where, these things will first have to be done somewhere else. And then we'll have to be shamed into accepting, so we basically build the infrastructure so the people who build the infrastructure get their, money's worth. And after that, we will dismantle that infrastructure. So people who dismantle the infrastructure will also get their money's worth. So I think it's a bit of a sad situation, but I think I don't think we as citizens have a choice but to suck it up and enjoy it while it's lasting. But I believe that I don't think it's a problem with the way that I don't think it should result in people getting complacent or people getting depressed about this whole thing. there is a certain top-down approach that has always been and will always be, maybe at some level loggerheads to what the ground-up reality actually is. But I don't believe that top-down actually discounts the bottom-up, right?
Okay.
There's a lot of changes that can happen actually from bottom-up, where, if there's something that you personally are feeling pissed off about or personally feeling upset about, the first thing is to actually visualize what you're talking about. Like, if you were given that amount of money for the coastal road, what would you do with it?
What is your replacement
Right?
option?
Yeah, I mean, so us as a studio, we were actually looking at deploying that same amount of money to create a transportational stack, which actually which augments the local train carrying capacity, right?
Correct.
So if that happens, it services 53% of Bombay's population, as against the coastal road that services, I think, 0.4% or something, which is the statistics. So I think, looking at the right space for inspiration, looking at the right points to find relevant city directions, which more often than not is there out there to be discovered, within data, within citizen consensus. So yeah, I mean, most of these are conceived of as, poster projects for brochures. They're not really responding to any kind of ground reality.
Got it. No, thank you so much. I think that addressed it fairly well. And I think one of the most important points that was also brought out there was it's also easy for everyone to call out problems that are faced, no matter whether that's in society, whether that's in our community, or whether that's in the community and the spaces that we live in. I think the best replacement, like you said, is not just calling out the problems, but finding the solution that are the replacements of it. And that's where people shouldn't go complacent on. And there's just one question to understand: how much of your design process is narrative driven? And that will be the last question we address today.
Yeah, I mean, great question again. So I think, a lot of very compelling stories start with narrative, right? I mean, I think the way, say, someone like Elon Musk has been able to fire up the world's imagination with interstellar travel, right? It's essentially a narrative coming out saying that, we need to be a two-planet species, right? These are stories that are now being told through, through progressive media, through film, through NASA, through their kind of outreach. And they become essentially result in a country taking its own space program more seriously, right? So I think stories that begin in a very compelling space that actually appeal to our best instincts as humans, I think those are stories worth getting behind. I believe personally, stories are fairly central to our design practice. I mean, we need to tell the right stories firstly to ourselves and then be able to externalize it outside. In fact, a lot of our new work is in this emerging area in design called speculative fiction, where story is everything. You're able to put a hypothetical year to it, like 2035, which is what we've committed to, because certain amount of real research and real projections also exist in that domain. But to tell compelling stories of the fragility of our internet framework, or to tell compelling stories about gender, or to tell compelling stories about visualizing a world that could be, if not already exists, right? So I think these are very, very compelling stories that we need to constantly tell ourselves and also surround ourselves with in an emerging practitioner network. And this is something that I've been talking to Varun about, on the sidelines of this as well, that, these are lovely collaboration opportunities for our extended network of creators, of musicians, of cultural artists, of, I think it's our responsibility as citizens or as practicing professionals to be able to actually tangibilize and visualize culture, right? This is one of our primary responsibilities. And all of that happens through narrative storytelling. The more powerful your story, the more important it is to get it out there.
Thank you so much. I think, I hope that addressed everyone's questions. And I think you're absolutely right. As we go into, I think it's a story of 2 decades is how I would put it, if I'm correct. You've obviously been doing it for probably a few more, but if I see the 2 most important decades were where we are ending right now in December, is the 2000s that build the foundation of everything good and bad that has happened across our communities, our cities, our identity, our country, or wherever else in the world. But I think it's given us a clear example, especially the last year of this decade, that we know what we should not be doing, even if our leaders, even if people in power might enable those things. The change is by individuals like each of you, us, and all collectively working towards it. We always hear this thing where when you said thakela, it's the same, right? It's the ideology where people keep saying India mein kuch hoega nahi, which is, it takes time, but it will happen, but it will be expedited with the work of people doing collective effort. And that's where creativity, innovation, and technology coming together can enable it. So thank you so much, Ayaz. Thank you so much for everyone tuning in. I hope you guys liked what we put together, and big thank you to Z by HP and Intel for enabling conversations like this to understand how technology can really reimagine our futures with change makers such as each and every one of you. We have one last session with Ishan Nair, which is going to take place at 3 o'clock. So please do tune in again on the same link, and reach out to Ayaz if you're interested in collaborating. You have his details. If not, he'll reach out to you if there's something interesting for a future project. And you can head out to our YouTube at tomorrow onwards. So if you missed this session or would like to share it with someone, that can happen. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy Diwali and have a great time. Bye-bye. Thank you. See you.